Good evening and welcome to One on One. This is a show that focuses on African leaders. My name is Mphosa Thole. I'm your host for this evening, but I'm not alone. Joining me is our guest, Honorable Brigitte Mabandla, who is chairperson of the African Peer Review Mechanism Panel. She's also served as a member of Parliament in South Africa from 1994 to 2009. She was the Minister of Housing, former Minister of Justice, as well as Minister of Public Enterprise. Honorable Mabandla also serves as the chairperson of the Presidential Advisory Council on National Orders. She joins us in studio. Honorable Mabandla, welcome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You have had an illustrious career. I mean, the titles speak for themselves. There's an incredible amount of work behind you. Talk us through your role today and your career and how it came to the point that it's now reached.
Well, it's credit to the ANC. Let me briefly give you a background of, who I am. I was a student activist in the 70s, early 70s. I studied at TEFLOP. I didn't complete. I was excluded. I went into exile. Of course, I was detained, like many of us. Went into exile and completed my law degree at the University of Zambia. I then worked within the ANC. And the ANC, like many other young people, I was exposed. What is not known is that, in fact, the ANC used to send young people to the UN because liberation movements had observer status. Both the PAC in South Africa and the ANC had observer status. We were exposed. We learned a lot from treaty discussions. As observers, we participated, we made statements representing our organization. I think I learned a lot about human rights, for example, from that exposure, about the importance of advancing women's rights as human rights. And indeed, I remain an advocate of the rights of the child, of general equality in society, and within the ANC itself, we were trained to be advocates for the good of people, advocates of human development. So that's my exposure in brief. It sounds political, but that's the truth. That's my background.
And that background has also gotten you to where you are today on the African Peer Review Mechanism, an eminent panel member as well as the chairperson of this mechanism. Talk us through the kind of work that you do, because it all comes in line with Africa Month that we celebrate. On Friday, we celebrated Africa Day, and today, as you work behind the scenes where nobody hears much about the kind of work that you do. And of course, there is a bigger impact, an instrumental impact that you play behind the scenes. Just talk us through that role and the kind of work your mechanism does.
I think it's correct to say the peer review mechanism is an excellent instrument for monitoring governance on the continent. It was a brilliant concept, and I must say it's credit also to our elders, to the presidents that came up with the idea at the time. I can mention here that former President Thabo Mbeki was one of the presidents that actually conceptualized and pushed through the idea of having an instrument of this kind. It was then tied to NEPAD. A.P.R.M was established in 2003. And it is got an interesting architecture because it is intended to be participatory, to involve the citizens in the process. Let me take you through that very briefly. At the top of the structure, it's the presidents who form, and these are presidents who have acceded to the mechanism. So it is a voluntary mechanism. They have to accede to it. We have about 35 countries. Give and take, perhaps I can say safely 36 now. In 2016, it was definitely 34 countries. And that's about 50%, as you can see. And at the top then, it's the presidents that form then a platform which is called the A.P.R Forum. And the chosen, amongst the heads of state will be chosen a chair. And thereafter, there is then what we call the focal points. The focal points are made up of designated persons by heads of states of countries that have acceded to the mechanism. So let's say, for example, in South Africa, South Africa is a member, is part of the A.P.R.M family. The focal point in South Africa is the Department of Public Service and Administration. So the minister there is actually the focal point for South Africa. It is then followed by the panel itself. Now, the panel members are appointed by the forum. They are appointed by the heads of state, sitting formally as the forum. And the chair and deputy chair are also appointed and considered individually for those positions by the heads of state. We then have country structures, and these would be the National Governing Council. In many cases, there is a secretariat, but also there are what we call technical research institutions, especially at the time of review. The panel is responsible for the review of countries. The focal points are responsible for managing the for in an advisory capacity to the forum. They are responsible for the administration of the A.P.R.M. The A.P.R.M itself has what we call a continental secretariat. We are lucky to have this time. We haven't had for a very long time a CEO. Our CEO now is Professor Maloka, Eddie Maloka, who's South African, a very efficient person, and has exceeded expectations in reaching the targets that the A.P.R.M had set itself.
And what are some of those targets?
Well, efficiency in the system, reviews, connection with other entities of the AU, and working together. So we now have smart connections. And we have had very important strategic planning together with other entities. So the impact of that is likely to be beneficial to all of us within our mandates. So you can imagine if let's say an institution's mandate is peace and security and works with the A.P.R.M, the feedback about governance of the countries that have been reviewed, if they are also countries that are being examined around matters of peace and security, then we then have better outcomes because of this linkage. It is very important to mention that today it is said that the A.P.R.M actually has the potential of propelling the AU to meet its targets even in 2063, and also in the overall targets of the UN, for example, around 2063, around 2030, meaning the SDGs. And I'm saying this because quite recently, in 2016, His Excellency, President Kagame, was given the responsibility of reviewing the AU and finding ways of making this body one of appropriate for its fit for its business and appropriate. And so in reviewing with the task group he had set up, they came out and affirmed the work of the A.P.R.M by suggesting that even though our mandate is that deals with countries that have acceded, that in fact, with regard to that, our mandate should be extended, that we should review all 54 countries of the AU around SDGs, as well as around the 2063 agenda. Now, because we have this efficient secretariat now of the A.P.R.M, led by the CEO, he then gets into conversation with related entities, related organizations of the AU, and working out. And also we have very important strategic partners, the UNDP, the Mo Ibrahim, I can't name them all now, but who then support all this. So you have think tanks working very closely with the A.P.R.M, linking also into the AU entities. And so that can only benefit us and within our mandates to come out and do the best that we can, So I think that's really the introduction I can give of the A.P.R.M. But I must say that it is also inspiring to be affirmed from outside. The current Secretary General of the UN, on his visit, I think it was 2016, and during his talk, after he had just been appointed and he had visited the AU, he actually affirmed the A.P.R.M as an African tool for African solutions, and in a sense affirmed that it is doing work, good work. I don't want to dwell on praises for the A.P.R.M. There is a lot of room for improvement. And because of this, we went to what in South Africa you call a bosberat.
Yes.
We went to a strategic retreat over a period of time to look at a strategic plan for the A.P.R.M. And we now have a strategic plan 2016 to 2020. And really one of the challenges is to deepen the review. We want to have a review that is can stand to rigor and to extreme interrogation as a tool that can be relied upon. And I'm hoping that in time there will be outcomes in this regard. There is a task team now that has been formed of persons drawn with expertise from different walks of life, professionals, to look critically, and some of whom were there at the beginning, to look critically at deepening the review of the A.P.R.M. I am informed because I just joined the A.P.R.M in 2015.
Yes.
I am informed that in earlier years, there was discomfort from member states that have acceded when they are reviewed and corruption, for example, is identified as a weakness. But my experience in 2016, when Djibouti and Chad were being reviewed, and those weaknesses were highlighted, they quickly accepted and said, we know we must do something about this. I was sitting there as a panel member, listening to responses from these countries that were being peer-reviewed by their peers, and were responding and saying, no, it's true, these are the weaknesses. I can tell you now, my experience is that there is a deep hunger for progress amongst leaders on the continent. There is that push. There is a determination to do better. And I think it's because of the openness. Because you see, your structures, your national governing structures, are supposed to be representative, to be diverse, to include even minority political parties, minority groupings in society.
But it's not always the case.
It's not, no, but here, if you're an A.P.R.M, if we are going to review, you have to abide by, you have to comply. You have to abide by those regulations. It must be representative.
We've seen countries like Gambia, the Ivory Coast, Zimbabwe, where leaders have hung and clung onto power, clinging and refusing to leave office, even though perhaps terms have ended, or the people on the ground are just lobbying and calling for them to really just resign and step aside to ensure that there is economic growth and those challenges that are deeply rooted, that bolder solutions come into place. In a case like that, in an instant where a leader just refuses to step down, they want to extend their stay in power and review certain mandates to cling on, how then can you come in and insist that you have reviewed and you are now implementing?
You know, we have to abide. Let me give you an idea of what our targets when we do the reviews. What is it that what are the thematic areas that we concentrate on? It's democracy and political governance. It's economic governance. It's corporate governance and socioeconomic development. Those are the areas we would focus on. So obviously, if a country is going for elections, and it is one of the countries that have acceded, and I'll use countries that I'll use a country that I reviewed, and that's Liberia. If we are reviewing a country, we are meticulous in looking at the laws. First, in looking whether they've acceded to international treaties, you know, on governance, on human rights, etc. We look at that kind of thing, but we also look at their regulations for promoting and protecting the citizenry and promoting growth and development. We look at things like that. Okay. Now, I'm going to share with you my first experience. I went on a mission, the very first mission, and when I got there, I was to meet the governing council. And there were people who then said, it was in Liberia, who then said no. And you know, Liberia, at the time I went, they had just emerged from the Ebola.
Yes.
And they were truly in a fragile state, in my view. But we were allowed, the great leader, the former president, allowed this process to proceed. We got there, and there were complaints. There were people who felt that the National General Council was not truly representative. And I did what our guidelines direct us to do. I then stopped the process. They had to then go back and restart the process of first organizing what will truly be seen as representative, and then coming back to us as the A.P.R.M, and then I would then lead a team for the review, and that's what happened. So as long as these are countries that have acceded to the mechanism, we are able to use the ground rules of review of what is required of them as members of this family, the A.P.R.M family. So in this instance, we then make sure that they comply by that. Their laws are a good indicator of the level at which they are. So we of course cannot go into a country, and we are not supposed to be political. We are not supposed to show any ideological that. We are supposed to go by just ground rules and what, treaty laws say, because there's consensus roughly around the treaties that are there. That's international law that governs how member states ought to behave. You know, those are set ground rules. Those are the norms and standards. So we go by those. I know I haven't quite answered you.
Yes.
And I will give a personal view. I think we, as this continent, should reach a stage where those that govern with a legitimate mandate. I think that is very important. A legitimate mandate. The people should speak. And it is the people's will that should carry us, should carry leaders along. I think that is very important. And I honestly think that these are the issues that the heads of state are seized with. You know, His Excellency, the President of Nigeria now, is the envoy for the AU against corruption on the continent. So there is an effort to really push ahead with progress for the people, with the people. In other words, in consultation with the people, the rulers must rule, you know. So I know we are not quite there. But I think that, you know, Zimbabwe is not a member of the A.P.R.M. But Gambia, now, they are preparing to accede to the mechanism. I think they are just, or they have, if we were going to go, if there was, we always have a panel meetings on the sideline of the summit, of the AU summit. And the AU summit is twice a year, in January and in July. If we were going, definitely, they have indicated, in fact, they indicated at the last sitting of the forum that they are acceding to the mechanism.
Which is fantastic.
It is, yes.
And of course, great strides lie ahead, even in that regard. And I want us to talk about the challenges across the continent. An observation is that one can say that Africa is both rich and poor. Rich in the sense of the mineral resources and the sort of minerals and resources that we'd have, like gold or oil, and poor because if you have to look at the reality on the ground, the poverty levels and the factors behind the lack of skill and education, one would call Africa a poor continent. So what in your mind do you believe would be some solutions to ensuring that the continent can have that fair balance, the mineral resources versus the skills and the wealth in skills that would be required?
There is such poor governance around extractive industries. It is really a shame for humanity that in this day and age we find such crude exploitation, even of children, unprotected, children below the age, way beyond the recommended age by labor, by international labor laws. But also the crude way in which the multinationals involved in this acts fail even to provide minimum basic amenities for people in the areas where there are mines. It happens here in South Africa.
Yeah.
It is a huge disgrace, and it is a big indictment on the intelligentsia of the continent that this thing still continues. But before I talk about the positive side of what's being done, I think I had to mention that it is terrible what is happening. The exploitation, the inhumanity associated with some of the diggings, on site, and I mean, you find in certain countries, I won't mention them, but where you find that this huge company that has been mining for ages, from where it extracts, even where it drives along, its own routes are not tarred. So you can't even say it's an indirect benefit, that they'll tar it and thus give indirect benefit to other users, such as the peasants, the farmers in the areas where they are extracting the minerals. So we do have a big problem. But also the humiliation of the disregard for laws of countries from which they extract. Let me make, and it's thanks again to the good work of the former President Mbeki with his report that was commissioned by the AU on illicit financial flows. In other words, so much is dug out, so much is made, so much benefit is got from extracting the minerals, yet there are no returns for the countries and the peoples from which these minerals are taken. Those are the challenges that we have. And it is important that heads of states, irrespective, because this is 2063, this is required by the plan, the 10-year plan from 2063. This is also required broadly by the meeting the targets of 2030, the SDGs, that you must improve the lives of the people.
Yeah.
There must be health facilities for people. There must be education, and those that benefit from that wealth must plow back. That has to happen. So I am saying our heads of states must hold hands, must be firm. There must be rigor around ensuring that agreements entered into are ones that genuinely benefit the persons of the people of our continent. I think they must hold hands. And I think the A.P.R.M is a platform for that. The A.P.R.M can enable progressive dialogues around what is to be done, can have very constructive feedback opportunity when it engages with the citizenry, because let me tell you what happens. After the review, and peer review by the forum, then the country has to then take the recommendations, correct the fault lines that have been identified, and then provide the A.P.R.M panel with progress reports.
Okay.
First, it must draw up the National Plan of Action, and it must have progress reports.
Okay, I'd like us to continue this discussion after the break. We are going to be taking a quick break. We'll be back with more with the Honourable Brigitte Mabandla in studio joining me this afternoon. Don't go away.